Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday evening, May the 13th. And our topic, which has touched a lot of interest, we have a very nice amount of pre-registrations, anti-Semitism and its effect on U.S. military morale and readiness. This is an important topic overall because it is our military. They defend us, and so they all have to be cohesive units. And those actions which may make them not as cohesive, we have to all be concerned about them. So we are fortunate tonight to have retired U.S. Navy Captain Marc Liebman, who has spent a 26-year Navy career. He's a naval aviator, an award-winning author. I guess as a side, as a naval aviator, when I guess you saw the couple of planes that somehow fell off their carrier, that must have been very personal because you've done some of that and been there, but that was very scary to see and what was happening there. So I'm sure that affected you personally.
Yeah, the flight deck is a very, very dangerous place, and it would give an OSHA inspector nightmares. But there's most of what you've read in the media about what happened is wrong, because they don't understand what happened or how it happened. But I think ultimately the Truman's captain will pay for the one that slid off the elevator with his career. The other one was a shit happens, pardon my French.
I don't know if we'll get time to talk more about that, but thanks for that. So again, Marc is a combat veteran of Vietnam, tanker wars of the 80s, Desert Shield Storm. He retired from the Navy as a captain, as I said, after 26 years. He has been the CEO of a $50 million aerospace and defense contractor, as well as a partner in a boutique consulting firm. And he joined us from Dallas, where we have one of our newest FJMC clubs. So this is a plug for more clubs joining us, joining FJMC from the Dallas area. The topic we want to talk about are Jews in the military, and specifically impact of anti-Semitism on military morale is going to be our topic. This was a very nice picture I found of a Navy ceremony, I guess it was, with the Torah. I can't read exactly where it was, but
The Naval Academy. That Torah is a survivor of the Holocaust.
and I think I read on there, this was on the Harry S. Truman carrier.
Yep. Yep. And maybe not this time, but there's a Torah at the Naval Academy that is a survivor of the Holocaust, or that period.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to have a variety of questions. We'll do this like we've done our other webinars. As I mentioned, I'm Irv Arconi, chair of our committee, FJMC Committee to Combat Anti-Semitism. I'll be asking a number of things, such as how things have changed from the past. How does anti-Semitism impact morale and readiness? And do we encourage young Jews to join the military? And what can Jews do to fight anti-Semitism in the military? So I'm going to stop sharing so we don't distract from here. Marc, how did you decide to join the military? And why did you choose the Navy?
Okay, so the simple answer is my father was a career Air Force officer and Air Force pilot. Or was, because he may rest in peace. They did 2 tours during World War II, one in Korea, one in Vietnam, that literally overlapped mine. And I always wanted to be a military aviator. And the reason I joined the Navy is because A, I like the sea, but more importantly, the Navy would guarantee me flight training and the Air Force would not. So, and there was another good deal, which would take longer to explain than it's worth, but that was an incentive for me to join the Uncle Sam's Navy. I became a helicopter pilot when I had this. I was voluntold, which means I didn't have a choice. I had the grades and everything else to be a fighter pilot, or in those days, get into the jet pipeline. However, somebody in the Bureau of Naval Personnel said we need 25 new helicopter pilots, and U-25, of which my name was one, away you go. So I had a choice to quit, which I was not going to do because this was a lifelong dream. And then I became a helo driver. What's interesting is my son just retired in January of last year, as an F-18 pilot. So we go round and round. He's Gen 4 of military aviators in the US, in the Liebman family.
That's wonderful. And what year did you sign up for the Navy?
I signed up in 1963, last century, and I retired in September 2000, September 1993. So it's 26 years. In terms of for long, I use the 26 years because it's for military calendar years. It's actually a little more than that.
Thank you very much. And I certainly remember those times. The 60s and the 70s were rather turbulent times for the country. So appreciate the service
You,
that you gave for us. Um, are there any estimates as to how many Jews are currently in the military? And how do you think that compares to the past?
That's a great question. So, right now, traditionally, I'll use the word peacetime as opposed to global wartime, World War One, World War Two. It's about a quarter of 1%. It varies. It goes up and down. Right now, there are more Jews in the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps and the Coast Guard than there ever have been. The Air Force, it's declining, and I can explain why. In the Army, it's been pretty consistent, but it's right around 0.25, 0.3%. And of the population of the U.S., Jews are about 3.5%, so are way underrepresented. During World War One, about a quarter million Jews joined the U.S. military, and during World War Two, about a half million, 500,000. In Korea, it was about 100,000. Vietnam, less than that, and then it's been declining ever since.
Any reasons you think it's been declining?
Yes, historically, Jews have been reluctant to join the military of any country, primarily because of anti-Semitism within the ranks. If you look at where most American Jews came from, it's Central Europe and we'll call Russia. And by Russia, I mean traditional Russia, which is Belarus, Ukraine, that whole part of the world, Poland, and then Central Europe. Anti-Semitism was institutionalized in the government. And if you got into the military, it was you were a second class citizen if in fact you were allowed in. The Brits allowed Jews in the military at odd times, generally when they were at war with the French, as did the French. Um, there were a lot of Jews in the Dutch Navy and throughout the U.S. history until the end of World War One. The Navy was the preferred service for American Jews, and it goes back to the fact that starting in with the 13 colonies, many of the Jews in the United States were traders, what they called traders, what we would call involved in international business. They were shipping, buying and selling goods overseas, shipping stuff back and forth, and that's how they made a living. And so the sea or the Navy, it was a logical continuation. But I think the reluctance of or the drop in Jewish enlistment in the U.S. military coincides a lot with the creation of the state of Israel. I hear this on a daily basis, not daily, but all the time. I'd rather have my son serve in the IDF than serve in the U.S. military. Um, what most people who make those statements don't realize is that that was not for the largesse of the people on this call, Canadians to some degree the same way, that Israel as it would not exist as it is today. We, the United States, provide a huge and have and do still do provide a huge umbrella to protect the Israelis from external threats, and the current conflict with Iran is and the Houthis is just part of it. It's just and actually a continuation of what was in fact going on for my entire career. Although I spent most of my time in the Pacific, but it it was so. I think there's a lot of factors. I also think that the fact that educational opportunities until about halfway through my career, you could make a whole lot more money outside the military than you could in the military. I mean, today, so back up. So when I retired in '93, an '06 making with Navy captain, same thing as an Army colonel, um, was making, if you took all benefits, flight pay, housing allowance, et cetera, I was making $82,000 a year. Okay. Today, 2025, I've been making about 140, which is a good buck. But that didn't come with any golden parachute. It didn't come with stock benefits. It did come with some very, very nice long-term benefits like TRICARE, which is healthcare, and a pension. But the pension is subject to the whims of a lot of things. So uh, again, I think it's economics. I think it's cultural, and I think the American Jews didn't feel threatened, which is unfortunate, but it's the way it is.
So you're saying that if American Jews don't feel threatened as a group, be it a religious or ethnic group, they feel perhaps less motivated to join the military and defend the country?
Yes, and I'll use the ramp up to World War II as Exhibit A. If you read a lot of the press and a lot of writings by Jewish leaders, is that they were, despite prima facie evidence, what was happening in Germany and occupied Europe, but let's say just Germany in the 30s. Um, there was kind of like it's not going to happen here. We're just not threatened because we have 2,500 miles of ocean between us and Europe, and we're just not going to be threatened because we live in the United States. We can go to synagogue. We don't have to worry about having a policeman outside the front door when we on Friday nights and Saturdays and high holidays. And so it's just not, we don't feel the pressure.
Hmm.
And that um, this and that was partly because Roosevelt did a wonderful job of keeping what was real, the truth of what was going on in Germany from the American people. There's a famous book called "Tell the Jews to Be Quiet" that documents Roosevelt's machinations to hide what was going on in the Holocaust from the American people. So we were ambivalent. By the way, I want to make a point here. My father was recalled for the Berlin airlift. And in 1949, early 1949, the brand new United States Air Force said, "Cy," that's my dad's first name, "we really like you. You speak fluent German, you speak another language or two. And oh, by the way, we'd like you to come become a regular officer in the United States Air Force." And my dad said, "Yes. Where are you going to send me?" "Well, we'd like to keep you in Germany." So as a 4-year-old, 4.5-year-old, we moved to Germany in 1949. And I could talk about growing up in Germany when there's no infrastructure for American citizens. I mean, I went to a Deutsche Kinderschule. The kids I played with, fathers were in the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe. Some of them were in the SS, the Kriegsmarine, um, and it was different. Um, we visited all the concentration camps that we could get to long before they became the museums that they are today. And I think in one of the publications that I wrote for, I talked about my first visit to Dachau as a 4.5-year-old. And my mother opened an oven and you could smell the burned flesh. I can still smell that today. Anytime I go near a concentration camp, it, it's like hits me in the head. But anyway, so I have a different view of anti-Semitism, and I have a different view of the impact of it and an American Jews' view of what went on prior to World War One or World War Two.
But but there certainly were many Jews who did enlist in for World War II when it started. My father-in-law, who just turned 100 years old, he was
Good for him.
19. Thank you. He was 19 years old, I think, at the Battle of the Bulge. And when I've talked to him about it, and he still has his mind, they didn't know a whole lot. He was from Bayonne, New Jersey, but they did hear enough, and he thought he should enlist. Um, but he told me, but he doesn't recall knowing a whole lot exactly, but enough that he felt, and he had some others to join. So um, uh, there were a fair amount, but I guess as what you're saying is maybe not all the Jews of that time. But what about for fast forwarding then today? Um, would you be encouraging young men and women, Jewish men and women, to consider the military?
Absolutely. And I can do it for 3 reasons. So just so you know, I'm going to put my money or my family where my mouth is. I have a son who is a corpsman in the Navy. He's assigned to a Marine um, recon platoon, which is kind of like the Marines version of the SEALs. And I have another son who's in a special boat unit, which is the used to be called in the Navy the Brown Water Navy, but they do they support the special warfare community. And I have a niece who is in the process of getting um, her degree as a veterinarian, being paid for by the Army, and she wants to be a war dog, what they call a combat dog vet. And to do that, she has to go through certain things. She's already gone through jump training, and she's planning to go apply to ranger training. And if you looked at this young lady, soaking wet, boots and everything else with her pack, she might get to 110 pounds. So, but good on her. So the answer to your question is yes. And here's the three reasons. Number one, it's wonderful training. You'll get more responsibility at an early age, whether you're enlisted, particularly in the Navy, but also the Marine Corps, than you will in any other civilian community as an 18-year-old, if that's when the age you enlist. So number one, you learn about leadership, and you learn about how to deal with people from diverse backgrounds. Number two, you get probably some of the best training in anything. Whether you're an enlisted person learning a skill, like my grandson's a hospital corpsman, he can take that skill and become a PA. He can become a EMT, whatever. So you get some really good training. If you're an aviator, like I was, the airlines await. There's going to be a huge shortage of airline pilots starting in about 3 or 4 years. So the number two is training. And the number three thing is that you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn how to be disciplined and take and look at things and evaluate things in ways that colleges and universities do not teach you, because it's practical. And and if particularly if you're in what I'll call a combat arm, but even a support arm, you have much more motivation, because if you screw it up, you could get killed. So it tends to bring one's focus. And then I'll add a fourth thing is you learn teamwork. So people used to ask me after I retired, what's the difference being a business consultant and being in the military? And I said, it's really simple. I walk into a room as a naval aviator. We're discussing a mission. There's 10 people in the room. I know when we agree to a plan, I know that every one of those individuals in that room are willing to die to accomplish that mission objective. I do the same thing as a consultant, or even as a leader of a business, because I've been CEO of a couple, or one, I should say. Um, and I go into that same room, 10 people, and I know walking out, there's at least a dozen agendas, some of which may have aligned with what I want to accomplish. So teamwork building, how to get and manage people to get them to do what has to be done, is a combination of leadership and management skills. The leadership is leading the people and motivating them. The management part is tracking and ensuring they get done in an efficient manner. And that, particularly as a young officer, you learn in spades.
So if you encourage them and they are going to go in, how would you talk to them about one is, do you acknowledge that there is anti-Semitism? They may encounter it. What would you advise them to do if they were to encounter that? And is it different whether you're an enlisted man or woman? Is it different if you're an officer, or you're a family member of someone who's in active duty?
Okay, so the question is it's not a question if you're going to run into anti-Semitism, it's a question of when. Now, I want to make a point about anti-Semitism before I continue. Anti-Semitism is not something you're born with. Okay, it's not like a heart defect or you're smart or dumb or whatever. It's a learned behavior. You're either taught it at home, in a school, or until 1965 in a church, because the Catholics used to call us Christ killers. And that's just the way it is. So the people that you run into who are anti-Semites are either trained, or they've said something or done something, and it betrays their ignorance. So let me give you a quick example. First roommate in flight school, you check in, you're assigned to a BOQ room. It was a suite, so two bedrooms. And I walk in Saturday morning, and the guy's sitting there looking at um, uh, car brochures. Back in the days, you had paper car brochures, and he wanted to buy a cruise, debating between a Corvette and a Camaro. I understand flight students have a heavy foot. That we like fast cars. I'm 80 years old. I like fast cars. Um, and he turns around. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm going out to dealer XYZ, and I'm going to go Jew him down on the price." I kind of looked at him and said, "Oh, really? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I'm going to go negotiate, blah, blah, blah." And then he used the term Jew him down about 3 or 4 times in the first 10 minutes of the conversation. So I asked him, I said, have you ever met somebody who's Jewish? And he looked at me and said, "No, why?" He was from Tupelo, Mississippi. This is 1968. Okay. He'd never met somebody who's Jew. I said, "Well, what does a Jew look like?" And he describes Fagin from Oliver Twist.
Ah,
Okay.
ah,
And so this is ignorance. So I said to him, I said, "Look, I'm Jewish. The fact that you're talking about Jewing someone down is offensive to me. Or it bothers me." And he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." He apologized profusely. And then he asked me, and this is the fun part, "Hey, I'm going out to the dealership. I'm leaving about 10 o'clock. Would you come with me and help me negotiate a better price?"
ah,
And I had, at that point in my life, I had never bought a car from a dealership, where I had to go negotiate something. But anyway, my point is that's ignorance, and it's different from anti-Semitism. So that's the first thing you have to figure out: is this guy ignorant, or woman, or is he truly anti-Semitic? So now we'll separate it into the three groups: officer, enlisted, and family, because the family is the one that really gets wound up. So the first thing, your first choice is to, in either case, officer or enlisted, is to talk to the individual and try to make this determination. If he's truly anti-Semitic, now you got an issue, because the chance of you changing the Jew, changing their behavior is someplace between slim and none. So what do you do? Choice one: you have to figure out if your superior or your common superior, whether it's enlisted sergeant or it's an officer, is anti-Semitic. If he is, you have to go to the executive officer or the next level up. So go around the thing, but you do it in such a manner that doesn't piss off your immediate supervisor, and say, "Hey, look, so and so is anti-Semitic. You must document this. It can't be he said, she said." Hopefully, you get witnesses. If you can't get witnesses, you sit down immediately after it happens and you write out detailed notes. You have to document this, because if not, there's no record. Um, and in the day and age of iPhones, you can walk around with or you can goad the guy into it and get it on an iPhone, but that bugs me. So that's the first thing. If that fails, then you go to the chaplain's office. Military chaplains are trained in every one of the major religions. So when I was in the Navy, there were several Christian denominations, Catholic, and a rabbi or two. We now have Muslim imams, we have Baha'i, we have Hindis, we have them all now. And when they go to chaplain school, they learn about every religion, and that's in their particular service. And believe me, it's a lot more than it used to be. So the chaplain then has freedom to go to the appropriate level, but you have to bring him a case. What did the guy say? What did he do? What was the context? All this stuff. As I used to tell people when they would work for me, if you got a problem, fine, bring me the problem. Tell me what your recommendation is, how to fix it, so I know what resources to do, but don't throw anybody under the bus. Well, in this case, you're throwing somebody under the bus because he's anti-Semitic, but you got to have the documentation of who, what, when, where, and how all this happened. Then the chaplain has the option of going to the CO or the executive officer. Yes, I know in the Army and the Air Force they use commanders and vice commanders, but I'm a naval officer, so it's COXO. Um, and that um, and he is trained to figure out where he needs to go and what messages to deliver. What usually happens is you wind up sitting in the CO's office with the chaplain present, going through this. Now, in the Navy, when that happens, because it's happened to me as a division officer, um, actually, I was the maintenance officer. They went around, they went to division. The enlisted guy was unhappy with his chief petty officer, and so it went right to the XO. And I'm sitting here as a Jewish maintenance officer, and I don't know what's going on. And I'm sitting in a room with the chaplain and CO going through this. Had he come to me, and I dealt with it pretty quickly. But I didn't have it. Didn't wasn't given the opportunity. But my point is the mechanism is there. If you're an officer, the process is the same, but different, slightly different. So one, again, you go one on one in private, find out and make the determination, ignorance, anti-Semitism or anti-Semite, and then document, document, document. I can't stress that enough. If you don't get any satisfaction, if he doesn't back off, and you hear it again, then you go to again, you make a determination, does my department head, or do I need to go to the XO? Or do I need to go to the chaplain? It's the same process, and the results are typically the same. However, in either case, if this guy's exhibited several times, it becomes it either becomes a judicial action, non-judiciary punishment, non-judicial punishment, which is captain's mast in the Navy, which the CO of the unit has power to um, assign various punishments. He's got limits on it, or it could wind up in a court-martial situation. I've never gone that way, but I will tell you one thing. I was in a squadron where the senior watch officer. So in every Navy squadron, there's a duty officer. I used to go to the guy who was assigned this task. He's typically known as a senior watch officer. So the 60 days from Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and Passover, the first 2 nights of Passover, I'd give him a memo in the formal hey, look, I prefer not to be assigned to duty on these dates. And most of them say, great, why? And I explain why, and they go, great, no problem, because he's got 30 days to fill in each month. So if Rosh Hashanah is up Tuesday, he can give it to the next Wednesday, as long as it's not Yom Kippur. So I went to this gentleman and I said, gave him a memo, and lo and behold, out comes the watch bill. I got the duty on Rosh Hashanah. Then the next month comes out, and I got the duty on Yom Kippur.
Oh,
So I figured this is not good. I went to him and I said, look, where's the matter? He said, look, needs a Navy. I just make up the watch plan. I don't make any changes. And he gave me a direct order, which was stupid in this case, of not going to a friend, because you can swap. Just go to the senior watch office and say, look, my wife's got a major doctor's appointment. I want to be with her. I'm going to swap with, Jimmy Jones. That's done all the time. He forbade me to do that. And he said, that's an order. That was his first mistake. So as it turns out, that 2 days after Yom Kippur, I'm flying with the skipper. I happen to have been the aircrew training officer in a squadron, and skipper and I was also what they call a NATOPS officer, which is I give one of the two officers that gave flight checks. And so we were doing the prep work for the skipper's upcoming flight check, and afterwards, a debriefing, he says to me, he says, Mark, he says, okay, aircrew training, Mark, tell me what kind of issues you got. What are things do I need to know that I can do as a CO to help? I said, sir, and I told him the story. He looked at me. He said, that's bullshit. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, write it up. Do you have the original memo? I said, yeah, I have don't laugh, everybody, a carbon copy. Um, and he brought it down to his office a few minutes later, and I had a written statement, literally handwritten. Actually, it's printed. And he looked at me and says, do not do anything. I will take care of this. What I did not know was that the chief petty officer in aircrew training officer had heard in the aircrew training, who also happened to be one of the aircrewmen, had overheard the direct order. So I didn't know there was a witness. And also the CO this is in the early 70s, the CO was a Nisai. He was his brother or his uncles had fought in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in Italy. He was one of the Japanese that came out of the internment camps in California, and he would have none of this. So he confronted this officer who first just lied to him, and then he presented the memo. And he said, well, I don't give a shit, whether he's Jewish or not. He's going to stand the duty when I assign him. That led to a unsatisfactory fitness report with a letter of reprimand. And the officer resigned his commission in the Navy and went to fly for an airline. And then he tried to get in the reserves. And the letter and the fitness report showed up, and he couldn't get into the reserves. So that was one way. That's one of the ways I've actually dealt with this ugly situation.
so
So
it does happen.
perfect. So let me talk about. So that's one way to do it. The point I want to make is, if you are a family member, you need to provide support. You need to urge them to document, and do not, repeat, do not call your congressman.
Good advice.
Irv,
Good advice. So,
Yeah.
so you've showed us it happens and how you dealt with it. Um, but if are there sufficient I don't know if it's incidence is the right word, but is a sufficient level of anti-Semitism, and can it potentially affect unit morale, unit readiness, the ability to fight?
Yes. So I don't believe that anti-Semitism in the Navy is rampant. I believe there are isolated instances. The Air Force has a different problem, and if you want to, I can talk about it.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
all right, so let me talk about that first, then I'll talk about um, why I don't think it's rampant. So at the Air Force Academy about 15 years ago, there was a group of Air Force officers and senior cadets that were prophesizing to convert non-Christians to Christianity, a specific sect in Christianity. Okay, this became pretty well documented, and in the ensuing years, there were several. There was the deputy commandant of the academy, a bunch of professors, a lot of student officers who eventually became commissioned were involved in this. This is the second time this has happened at a U.S. military academy, because in the 1920s, officers at West Point graduating who were Jewish and or not Episcopalian were being pressured to convert. I can give you two names: Mark Clark, Caspar Weinberger, who were forced to convert, not by any outright coercion. They were just told that if you ever want to get past first lieutenant, you better convert. Pretty strong words. Anyway, so um, at the Air Force Academy, you had this effort. There were two Air Force chiefs of staff, Norton Schwartz and Goldfein. I can't remember his first name. Four-star generals who were chief of the Air Force, both of whom were Jewish, and they tried to put this down, and they failed miserably. There were several officers relieved, several officers court-martialed, several officers retired early, but it still is to this day hanging over the Air Force Academy, and it's one of the reasons why the number of Jewish kids wanting to go to the Air Force Academy has dropped. By the same token, the Naval Academy, which by the way is the only school of the three service academy, well, actually four, include the Coast Guard, um, five include the Merchant Marine, that has buildings named after American Jews who served in the Navy. Um, Albeit one of them is Hyman Rickover, and that's a case we can talk about because he was born Jewish but didn't die Jewish. His um, stone shows he's a Lutheran because he was given last rites as a Lutheran. But anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So, um, what you're going to find in the Navy, at least this is my experience, are isolated instances. I had four, maybe five in 26 years. So that's what, one every 5 years. Okay. If you're a woman, you're going to get insulted at least once a year, particularly in the combat arms. Um, I think, and there's far more issues around racism against certain um, ethnic backgrounds. Um, right now, I would not want to be a Chinese American in the United States military, even though they've proven their loyalty, backgrounds, whatever. There's just the society itself is putting pressure on them.
So how does all this then affect morale? And if you're in
Okay, so let me get
combat or
this.
not,
So a combat unit is all about trust. So I was a helicopter pilot, aircraft commander, co-pilot, two or three in the back. Okay. You're going to go in and make a rescue. So if I'm flying with a co-pilot, or let's say I'm in the back, I'm an enlisted guy and I'm flying with a known anti-Semite, um, and I get wounded, am I going to trust him to take care of me? Or on the
do
other
you?
side, well, that's a question, because the answer to me is no. But the other side of the conversation is as a Jew, and he's a known anti-Semite, he gets killed. Am I going to take care of him? It's an ugly issue. It's an ugly situation. So what you have done, anti-Semitism disrupts what we call the special trust and confidence in each other. When you're in an aircraft crew, like I was, with two pilots, three enlisted, trying to make a combat rescue, what we do in the helicopter, every one of our lives depend on it. And not only does that, so does the survivors. We must have full trust and confidence in the guys or now women, who are flying with us. You spread that out across morale. So if you're in a foxhole, you're seeing in a foxhole with an anti-Semite and you're Jewish? Huh? You gonna trust him when you go to sleep at night? Um, or if he's your fire teammate, you're going into a building. Come on. So this is how it affects the trust, which affects morale, which affects combat effectiveness.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And um, again, I flew with an anti-Semitic officer. He was my first detachment, second, well, he was a, not, yeah, I'll call him it's actually second det ONC. It was awful. I had to sit in the cockpit with this guy, hours on end, until I got him relieved. But that's another conversation. He got himself relieved. But because he was incompetent. Um, but my point is that when you sign up, put up your right hand and say, "I swear to uphold, defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God, against all enemies, foreign and domestic," blah 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 blah. Okay, you have basically written a blank check to the United States government for your life, and by that means the guy sitting next to me is taking that same oath. I need to be able to trust him with my life.
Very
Does that
good.
answer your question, Irv?
It does. We have a very basic question in the chat. Can you get kosher food in the Navy?
Yes.
How?
Now, here's how it works. If you're on board ship, um, they can prepare kosher meals, or they can give you MREs, which are cut by themselves kosher. Um, Now, I've never had, or you can be a vegetarian. So if you're an enlisted guy, you go into the mess, you just don't eat meat unless it's fish. Period. End of statement. Unless it's catfish, then you don't eat that either. But so you what the Jews who are kosher are encouraged to do, want to keep kosher, they are encouraged to eat. I'll use the word vegetarian, but you have a selection of food. So you can eat pasta, you can eat this. You just have to realize that the milk is probably not kosher. If you can drink that, you know, the cheeses may or may not be kosher because they may have Ren in them, but that's a value thing you have to do. In the Army, the MREs are all kosher. Period. End of statement. They're also halal, um, and so it's not an issue. Um, my family doesn't keep kosher, or as my wife said when we first got married, there are too many good things I want to eat that I can't eat if I really want to keep kosher. So, but the answer is yes and no. The other part of it is during Passover. We typically take over a kitchen on board the ship, and there are recipes and processes that the people who cook meals on board the ship do to kosher the kitchen so that we can prepare a Passover meal. Now, much of what you get comes from Anashevitz and other common places, but there's the food, the chicken, whatever meat. It's kosher. It's kosher for Passover. Now you don't get kosher sodas and stuff like that, but pretty much the bulk of what you eat is kosher for Passover.
Excellent. Here's another very interesting question. Since you were in Desert Storm, having retired in 93, can you comment on the dynamic in that area since you were with Saudis or Kuwaitis or others, and there you are? If I recall,
Yes.
someone was saying that they were asking the Jews not to wear Morgan Davids or whatever. But what went on in your experience, and how was it interacting with the
Okay.
Kuwaitis or the Saudis?
I don't wear jewelry, but I wear the same star dated my dad wore in World War II, Korea, and then he gave it to me before he knew he had orders to go to Vietnam. I wore my two tours in Vietnam throughout my Navy career. Gave it to my son. He wears it. I now have it back because we think we may have a sixth gen naval aviator, and I will give it to him, assuming I'm still around, if in fact he goes that route. So the answer to that, I wore mine along with my dog tags. It's under your uniform or your Zoom bag, your flight suit. Who cares? Nobody said anything to me about it. And I was in Saudi at least once a week during Desert Shield, during Desert Storm at least once a week. Up in the lead up from August, I was there for 2 and 3 weeks to crack, come back, go back. I was commuting back and forth. Anyway, so I will to give you one instance that is humorous, but it's the epitome of what happened. So after the war ends, I was on the USS Ranger. My role was it was the operational command and control of all the helicopters in the Persian Gulf. 14 nations, 150 odd 140 odd helicopters. Um, I had my staff had OPCON of them, or operational control. So I was what we call so at the end of the war we had a banquet on Ranger for the naval ministers of all the GCC nations: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, UAE. I think I got them all. I may have left one out. Oh, Qatar. They all show up at 5 in the afternoon. It's Ramadan, so we can't eat. So we all go down to the flag mess. We're all wearing what they call mess dress. When my boss, Ron Zlatteper, told me to bring my mess dress, I said, well, "Sir, you're nuts. We're going to war." He said, "Trust me, you'll need your mess dress." And I wore it twice in the 7 months we were gone. But anyway, so this is one of those. So we're all in mess dress. We got on the flag thing. We can't serve any food until sunset. It's early. It's when in like February. It's like the first week in March, second week of March. So we sit down, and the only people in the room is the admiral staff. It was '06 and above. So we had skipper of the ship, we had the air wing commander, we had me, the operations officer. Anyway, so we had 7 officers, 7 naval officers plus an admiral, and the 7 um, GCC members. I'm sitting between the naval minister of the UAE and the naval minister of Oman. The naval minister of the UAE was educated at a place called Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. The Omani was educated at Oxford, so English was not a problem. So we go through we didn't do all the mandatory toasts because you have to toast the chains of command. So if you got 7 countries times 4 people, times that's 28 emptying the glass, we'd all be drunk.
It's
So it was a
28,
sip.
28 glasses.
Yeah. So it was basically a sip. We just did the COs, the presidents or the sheikhs, the prime minister or the head of the government, the head of the military, and our and navy. So we did 4. So it's like and we did them together. And so we're going through. So about halfway through, it was the end of dinner. The naval minister of the UAE turns to me and said, "Captain, how does it feel to be an American Jew defending Arab oil?" Think about that for a second. How did he know I was Jewish? Well, I wear a ring, and you can't see it on it, but it has in Hebrew the Song of Ruth. My wife has the identical room, the second verse. Um, and I looked at him. I said, "Sir, it's pretty simple. Those are my orders." He looked at me and smiled and said, "Great." And we talked a little bit about it. Because we've been talking about going to Brown and skiing in New England because he'd skied. I went to school in New England, so we had a lot of things we were talking about in common. And it was actually a wonderful discussion. There's a longer story what happened afterwards. I don't want to go into that because it's business. But the fact of the matter is, every American Jew that was there, and British Jews, and Syrian Jews, and Egyptian Jews who were in their militaries, okay, French Jews, um, Polish Jews, whatever, all were there to do a job, which was kick the Iraqis out of Kuwait. Period and full stop. There was nothing about deposing Saddam Hussein in the UN's resolutions. And that's what we did. Those were our orders.
Excellent. I have another question, but before that, just to share with you a comment that David Glass made. He was a petty officer, and going back to the food, he remembers that cooks made a Seder on the USS LaSalle in Bahrain. So that's from Petty Officer Glass.
And
Um,
also, Glass was a question. I won't ask you how good it was, but it's done. Here's an interesting thing. The chaplains on board the ship have copies of all the recipes for all the national holidays and traditional dishes. They can then when I was a junior officer, what happens is they get the senior Jewish officer on board. He becomes the rabbi, so to speak, and you then order all the stuff. And I did this as a lieutenant junior grade in '02. And that's when I sort of knew this because I was service brat, but in the Air Force, this doesn't happen. Um, and and yes, they have the menus. They know how to cook it. The instructions are very specific on how to kasha the kitchen, what parts of the kitchen have to be done, blah 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 blah. So they do it. It's
One,
good because they're given an order by the either the executive officer or the CO. You're going to cook for a Seder. Period. Go figure it out.
um, that's an excellent answer. I can visualize that. One person had a question that I'd gotten before. Um, Asking about the pervasiveness of anti-Semitism in the military, but even more importantly, what are the active programs in the military? So let's look at all the services that are in place to combat anti-Semitism. What is being done overtly by the services, and I guess by DoD, to combat anti-Semitism?
Um, it's pretty simple. It boils down to you as a commanding officer, whether you're a detachment ONC, whether you're a unit CO, or even if you're a department head or we call in the Navy a workshop or a divisions officer. You just don't tolerate it. Okay. And you do that by actions as well as with words. And that's how you combat it. Because um, again, anytime I was the CO, I didn't make a big deal about being Jewish. In fact, I'd rarely, the only way you find out is if you ask me. Um, and because again, what I did as a leader was more important than what I said as a leader. But in this case, words become important. And so I used to tell people, I don't, because this is the way I was brought up. My dad used to tell me that we all bleed the same. And I don't care who you are, what you look at, what language you speak at home, um, what the color of your skin is, what your national orientation, nowadays your sexual orientation, whatever. I don't care. What you do is the most important thing. As long as you do it with excellence, i.e., to the best of your ability, and you do it legally, morally, and ethically within the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. So, in other words, what you do speaks so loudly I can't hear what you're saying, or do it, whatever words come out. So, if you do your job, you don't have a problem, unless you make a racist or I've had racist comments, and I dealt with them pretty harshly. Will not tolerate it, and that basically sets the tone. And that's what you have to, and that's the way. Um, I know when I was in the Navy, there was zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. There was zero tolerance for racism, and yet it existed. Um, and I'm using racism not necessarily directed at the African American community. I'm saying racism directed at Hispanics, Orientals, whatever. Um, if the CO and the head shed, in this case it's a chief of naval operations, makes that a point, and he does it with his all navs when he takes over. These things will not be tolerated, and that's the tone. And I had some of the first women, if assigned to a combat, what the Air Force would call a combat coded squadron, and I sat them down and said, "Hey, ladies, you're here. You're joining a men's club, boys club, okay? But we have standards. You meet the standards, you won't have a problem. Fail to meet the standards, we're gonna have an issue." Next question. Irv, you're muted.
Here I am. That's hard for me to ask a question, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, we were rehearsing.
Are there are there very many Jewish flag officers on active duty?
Yes, far more than you would imagine. I have a list, and some of them. Um, so here's what's again. This is an interesting again um, dichotomy. I have someplace in my computer a list. There's been about 35 Navy flag officers. Okay, I think there's been a bunch of them. So here's an interesting thing. The founder of the Green Berets, Aaron Bank, was a nice Jewish boy. The guy who directed the naval strategy for World War II was a guy by the name of Joe Tosick. He's a vice admiral. His story is interesting because for a while he was the head of naval strategy at the Naval War College, and a lot of officers were coming through his classes by the name of Halsey, Spruance, Nimitz, just a few names you might, Turner, some names you may or may not recognize. Um, but if you look at the number of flag officers, more than you would think. We've had a chief of naval operations, Jeremy Borda, who's the only person in the United States Navy who's held every rank from E1 to 011 or 10, whatever a four-star is. We've had two chiefs of staff of the Air Force. We've had a host of two and three star flag officers in every service. Um, Dave Mangus is a good friend of mine. Well, not a good friend of mine. We met. He was a student of mine in the training command. So he wound up with becoming the deputy commandant of the Marine Corps. So the answer is there's lots of them. That we don't make a big deal out of it, and here's why. DoD, and this is one of the interesting things, which by the way I applaud this policy, is DoD is not allowed to um, collect data on religions. In other words, they can't tell you by law how many people are Catholic, how many people are Mennonites, how many people are Jews, whatever. Can't, not allowed. So getting accurate data about this is a bit difficult. I have a sneaky way of doing it at the service academies, um, but which is a kind of an indicator. But that we don't make a big deal out of it. We are who we are. Again, what we do speaks so loudly. It is us. Okay, and if we deal with that, we come across anti-Semitism, we deal with it. Um, and you deal with it in the confines of the UCMJ and where you are. And
I appreciate that. We have two
in
more
history,
questions.
U.S. history.
Yep. We have two
Go
more
ahead.
questions, I think, which we have time for. One is when you were talking about the conversion back then in terms of people like Caspar Weinberger. Um, Don Shapiro mentioned that his dad had attained the rank of lieutenant, second lieutenant in the Army Air Corps during World War II. Was the conversion pressure an official policy of the
No,
military, or was it just unofficial, or what?
it was the policy of several general officers or senior officers. One of them whom was named George S. Patton. Um, to do this. I'll give you a quick story about in 1940, my dad had 2 years of college at CCNY, and it was enough to become an aviation cadet. So he went down, he wanted to be a naval flying the Navy because he watched aircraft carriers being built at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And so he goes through all the tests, passes them, goes to sign his papers, and a chief petty officer says to him, says, Mr. Liebman, sorry, the Navy can't take you as a naval aviator. And my dad said, why? He said, because you're Jewish. We don't take Jews in the Navy, which was a shock. So he went next door. The Air Force said, here's the paperwork, sign here. Um, so in 1963, when, 63, yeah, 63, let's think for like a second. So the Navy's offering me guaranteed flight training. The Air Force is saying, well, we'll wait till you graduate and then we'll decide whether you're going to become a navigator or a supply officer or whatever. And I'm saying, Dad, the Navy's guaranteeing me flight training. And he was stunned. This is what, 30 years later, 38 years later, 28 years later, whatever the math is. So the answer is no, it's not a policy. And in fact, it's a court martial offense.
Thank you. All right, last thing here. You're asked, do you have any favorite authors, especially in the military spy genre?
I do, besides me. Um,
Yes, by
so
the
I'm
way,
a,
feel free to promote your book, sir.
okay, so those of you who want to, I write about three different genres. The heroes are all American Jews, mostly naval officers, um, and they're operationally and historically accurate, and you can get them on Amazon. So that's the plug. So the answer to the question, I love Webb Griffin. I'm sort of a fan of Tom Clancy, but I think there's better. Stephen Kuntz would be that's Conts, not Z. Um, who is probably one of my favorites. And then there's what's his name? Somebody have him send me. I'll give you a list of the authors that I read that are fiction. I don't read as much fiction as I used to. I'm spending more time becoming a historian, so I'm reading history all the time. Um, by the way, of the 17 books that are out there, six of them become Amazon bestsellers. So somebody's buying them. If you're interested in learning about what it's like to be a naval officer, and in every book, whether it's about the Age of Sail, American Revolution, or modern, or my career, all deal with anti-Semitism. So a lot of what you hear and you've heard me talk about are in these books. But the Josh Heyman series, you can go find it on my website. Follows the career of a young naval officer. If you want to learn about what it's like to fly combat sergeant special ops, first two books, Big Mother 40 Inch Arabs 2, is as one of my guys I flew with said, a textbook. But I write about other things, and I have a series of counterterrorism novels. And guess what? The bad guys, except for one of them, are members of Al Qaeda or Hezbollah. Um, so
Sounds,
so Webb Griffin, but Webb Griffin, Clancy to some degree, Stephen Kuntz, and I have a bunch. That's 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 where I'd start.
that is terrific, and it's wonderful to see the library behind you, paper copies. If I were to interview your son, I wonder whether I would see that or just his devices, but that's okay. That's a different thing.
So what you see when if you saw my son, you wouldn't see a library, you'd see a bunch of exercise equipment in his office. Um,
Sir, this is great. We really appreciate it. And any final comments you have as to what the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, what can we do in supporting our active duty members, either who are actual FJMC members or family members? What would be your last words of advice to us? What we can do to support Jews in the
well,
military?
well, number one is encourage young men and women to join because there are lots of wonderful Jewish role models that served in the United States and did so with distinction well above and beyond the call of duty. That's number one. Number two is when you find family members. One of the wonderful things about the Jewish community is every time I've gone someplace and I've walked into a synagogue wearing a uniform, and because it's not a home, people have welcomed me, and that is a wonderful feeling. In some cases, it was a bit strange. I don't have time to get into why it was strange, but my fact of the matter is support those who serve because our freedom depends on it. And then the last thing is that what can I do for you to help you spread the good word about what you're doing? I'm happy to do speaking engagements. I'm happy to do whatever. When I say whatever it takes, um, I'm happy to support you guys um, because I turn 80 in less than 60 days. Um, um,
Mazel tov.
yeah, and um, I'm not, I tell people I'm immortal, but and I have proof. But the reality is, I know that my time around here is limited. So there's lots of things that I'm involved with doing, primarily to combat anti-Semitism. It's really now, besides writing books, it's my number one focus, and I will do whatever. That's what I said in the beginning before we started this. We've done some things, unique things here in North Texas, to throw some water on some fires, and we're continuing to do that. And actually, I will say this about the great state of Texas: we have we have the ear of the Attorney General and the governor and the law enforcement people, unlike some other states.
That is very good to hear. I think that's a good note to end on. Sir, we appreciate it. Thank you again for your service and for your whole family, going back several generations and future generations. I thank everybody who's on this call. And just put a plug in for more is that we are less than 60 days from our convention. And at convention, there'll be some workshops on anti-Semitism. We will have a workshop led by ADL, how to advocate against anti-Semitism in your communities. And we'll also have a session with Stand With Us on looking at Gen Z, those who are 12 to 24 years old, how they're doing it. And we'll have a third session, pre-conference session, with Spiritus, who has developed a new program to certify Jewish professional lay leaders to combat anti-Semitism. So again, it's not something you're born with, how to combat it. It is a skill and knowledge you have to gain. Sir, thank you very much. I
Thank you.
was not in the military. I was in the Peace Corps, but I did 2 years, and everyone should do national service.
I agree.
Thank you all for joining us, and this will be posted online shortly, so you'll be able to see a recording and share with others who couldn't make it.